Welcome back. Let's continue to talk about objects and more specifically in this lecture about object methods. So here I have the John object that we created in the last lecture, and as we can immediately see, an object can hold different types of data, such as an array. So we have once again strings and numbers and even booleans here. But that's not all an object can hold. So objects can also have other objects or even arrays or functions. So let's just put an array in here. Let's call it family. So in here we can put the names of John's family member. Let's say they are called Jane, Mark, and Bob. Alright, and we can even put functions in here. So let's imagine that we want to calculate the age of John right here in this object. So we could actually do that. So let me show you how. We already created the calculate age function before, so now we're going to do something very similar. So just calculate age and then function and year of birth. Alright, and do you notice something here? Probably you do, because this is not the way that we first defined the functions, right? The functions that we defined in the beginning were function statements, right? But then I explained to you that there's another type of defining functions, and that's function expressions. And that's very important right now, because here we actually have a function expression. This is a function expression. So we have a variable name, which is this key, and then we have the value, which is the function. So this would be the same as writing out here. This is actually calculate age. This would be the same as writing out here calculate age. Of course, the var have to be here equals function and year of birth. So this is the exact same thing, but inside of an object, since we have these key value pairs, we don't have the assignment operator, the equal, but we have this colon here, such as we have with the other variables. But anyway, this is a variable inside of the object, which we then assign a function. Alright? So function expressions, that's why they're important. And this function will simply return the difference between 2016, which is the year of today, minus the year of birth of John, which we passed into the function by using this parameter. So we can return this immediately instead of writing it into another variable. So last time we wrote this similar function, we first created a variable called age, then did the calculation and then returned the age variable. But now we can simply return the result of this operation, 2016 minus year of birth. And that's it. So we can now use this. Let me first simply console.log the entire John object just to see what it looks like here in the console. We can click here to see the rest. And alright, so we see that family is an array and that calculate age is a function. Okay. So let me see the family here. So family, and this is the dot notation as you probably remember, and it's easier to use, and that's why I'm usually going to use this one. And now if we refresh this, we of course get this exact array. Now just to get a little bit of practice, how would we get this one here, Bob element? I'm sure that you know by now that we just used the brackets notation for this. So we use 0, 1, 2. So this family array is now a normal array that we can simply treat as an array such as we did before, and therefore we can then apply the square brackets and retrieve a value out of it. Alright, and here is Bob. So he's the element number 2 of the family array that is into the John object. Great, and let's now call the function. And before, when we run a function, when we call the function, we simply wrote the name of the function. Now we of course have to write the function name associated with the object. So it's like we did before with the dot notation, john.calculate age. And then we can write a year like 1990. Okay? And if we now run this, then we will get the age of 26. Okay, so objects can contain functions. And these functions, they are called methods, right? So as I was telling you in the array lecture, where we were using all these methods, and I can actually show it to you up here. So do you remember push and shift, pop and shift, and also the index of? So these are functions that are associated to all arrays. So these are also called methods. So the push method, the unshift method, pop, shift, and index of methods of John, right? Okay, now something that doesn't really seem right here is that we have to pass this argument here, this 1990, inside of this function if it's already in the John object, right? So it doesn't really make sense, because we could of course go ahead and put something else here like 1970, and then he would be 46 years old. But here inside of the John object, the year of birth would be 1990, and so this wouldn't make much sense, right? So what if we could actually use this value in our method? This would be super useful, wouldn't it? And as it turns out, we really can. And how do we do this? It's actually really easy. All we have to do is to say that we do not want this parameter here, which comes from this function. So we will get rid of this and of this. And what we want is this dot year of birth. So let me explain. This here refers to the object John. So John is the object that has the calculate age method. So this means John, because it's this object, right? And then it's simply treated as a normal object. So we can replace this with John, and then to retrieve the value of the year of birth, we simply use the dot notation such as we've been using before. So John dot year of birth, right? So this will then return 2016 minus 1990 in this case. So let's check that out. We will once again console log this john.calculate age. And now, since the function doesn't have any arguments, any parameters, we simply do it like this, right? So even if there are no parameters in the function, we still have to put the parentheses here. And we don't need this one anymore. So let me comment it out. So you get to keep it. And let's now refresh, and here it goes. So 26. So we call the function a method, and we didn't even specify the year of birth, but still our function was able to retrieve this value right of its own object, so of the this object, and then use this value for the calculation and return it here. All right, so let's now actually store this value in a variable, var age dot john dot calculate age, just like this. Okay, now imagine that we want to add this data into our object. So as we learned before, we will simply do john.age equals age, right? So this is exactly what we did before. We just used the dot notation for the object and then inserted some value in there. Let me show it to you. So this is what we did here with the Jane object. So Jane.name, and then we put Jane here in Smith. So this is the exact same way. We simply, as a first step, defined the age variable and then inserted it into the object by using this. And if we now console.log the object or age, should be right in there. So let's click here, and yeah, here we go. Age is 26, exactly the value that we calculated here. Okay, really cool, right? Now we can make this even better. We can take it even one step further. And I'm sure that you might already be wondering why we didn't do this automatically here, right, in the function. So why didn't we write the age into the John object automatically in here? And of course we can. So let me just comment out this piece of code so that you keep this one as well, this version of the object. So we'll call it version 1.0, and then I will create version 2.0. And it will be similar, of course. Okay. I also don't want this anymore. And actually I'm going to comment out all of this. But it's still here, so in the end when you download this code, you get this code as well. Alright, remember that what we want to do now is to automatically store this result right into this object. So before, what we did was to call the method, store the result in a variable, and then added this variable to the object right here. Okay? But now what we want to do is not this, but we can do it like this. So this dot age should be 2016 minus this dot year of birth. All right, so let's see how this works. So get rid of this. So as you remember, this refers to the John object, right? So what we're saying is when we call this method, create a new variable or a new property inside the John object called age, and then calculate this value and assign it to this property. And property is probably something new because up until this point I didn't use the definition property. So each of these key value pairs is a property. So John has a couple of properties which are name, last name, year of birth, job, is married, and family. So all of these are properties of the John object, and calculate age is the method. So each object can have properties and methods, right? So let's now see how this works. So all we have to do here is now to say John dot calculate age, and that's it. If we do this, this will automatically calculate the age based on the year of birth that is in the John object, and then store it in the age property of the object. So let's then console log the John object and reload. So this is our object, and here is our age of 26. Perfect, right? And we could, of course, instead of writing this here, we could simply have written John, but that wouldn't be perfect because it wouldn't be as flexible as writing this. Because imagine that I wanted to do this. So let's say we want Mike, and here we have Mike as well, and then console.log Mike, but Mike was born in 1950, right? So I will leave everything else or just delete it. It's just to show you why this is so useful to use the this keyword. So if we now see the Mike object here, this also worked without we having to change anything, because this now refers to the Mike object, right? So the this keyword is something extremely important. It's extremely useful in JavaScript and when we are working with objects. And this is still only a small part of what there is to talk about JavaScript objects. So we barely scratched the surface here, but it's already a great amount of material here that we covered in these two object lectures. So now I suggest that you get some practice, that you create your own objects with your own properties, your own examples, and with your own methods, so that you start to get a feeling for the objects and for all the other material that we have covered so far in this course. And after that, you can come with me right to the next lecture.